Hello and welcome to program number 8, looking at line, shape and value. This is the start of the last program for this series, and it's been quite an interesting program from my point of view, and there's been some really valuable people who've been working in the background. People like Jack and Bill and Joe and Les and Julie, Deidre, and of course dear Jim. And they've done a lot of very valuable work in assisting to put this program together, and I'd like to thank them for that. But now on to the program, and today we're going to be looking at this rather strange collection. You'll be pleased to know it's not skulls, it's a pile of shoes. And what you have here, of course, are some ladies' shoes, men's shoes. I've thrown in a couple of pieces of rags, a couple of belts. The old burlap or hessian comes in very handy, and of course the everlasting pot plant. Now what you look at here, of course, is a box, and the reason we're using the box is so that it creates a deep tone. So you can look at that, and then you can also look at it from this angle, and you can see that, you know, there are a number of lines that lead your eye into the composition. Like from over here, you can follow that line that snakes in and follows up to the shoe. You'll notice that I've deliberately put shoelaces in. That's why the belt is there. You've got this line that snakes across the top. You've got this shoe that leads in. So there's a whole range of lines. Even this line that comes up over the edge leading in, and then you've got this bit of a belt, and that's another line that leads into the work. You've got these creases here that follow in. Now, there's a whole range of lines, isn't there, that you can see. The more you look, the more you will see, depending on where you are in the still life that you will set up in your own environment. Now, in addition to that, of course, you've got all the shapes here. This shape is not quite the same as that shape, or is it? They're not the same, but they are similar. And you need that kind of thing to get a sense of unity working within your drawing. So there's that, and that's repeated down in here. This shoe is repeated there, and then you've got sand shoes or sneakers back in here, and you've got a lovely lady's boot sitting there. And so you've got a whole range of shapes, but you've also got these shapes. And I throw them in because these tend to be more organic, whereas these tend to be more geometric or mechanical. But even so, when you look at that shape there, you can see that it's repeated in the shape of the shoe as well. So there's a relationship between these particular leaves and the shoes, and again, you need to look at that. Now, as you look over here, you'll see that there's a shadow sitting underneath there, and you can certainly use that. So that's line and shape. Now let's look at the tones. Look how dark it is back in there. You can get lovely and black when you go in there with your charcoal or your Conte or your compressed charcoal. You get really dark in there, which is great. But out here, you're going to see that there's going to be highlights on this shoe because it's polished, and there's some highlights on this one and highlights on that one. So that's going to be white. And then, of course, these leaves are getting light. If you're never sure about whether something's getting light or not, just put your hand over it, and if you can see that there's a shadow underneath because your hand is blocking the light, well, then automatically you know that it is receiving light, and you don't have to put tone where there is highlight. So looking at those, you've got quite a collection there of lines that lead in, snake in, wriggle their way in. You've got shapes that are repeated all the way through, and of course you've got the full range of tone from dark out to light. Now, if we look at some of the images that I might have on here, here we go, and we've seen this image before, and it's where, you know, there's cones and there's brown paper bags. Now, it's using line, shape is repeated, and of course you've got the full range of the tonal values at work there, from deepest black right through to white. And look at the composition. Look at the way it's pulled together. Notice that the edges go right out to the edges of the paper. And the shapes are sitting comfortably within your composition. They look as if they occupy real space. Now, this one tends to defy some of our rules on perspective because it's darkest in the background. And many times you get a lot more success if you use dark in the foreground going back to light. That was a technique used by people like Corot and Claude Lorrain, and you'll find that the Impressionists use it as well. Darker colours in the foreground, or more intense colours in the foreground, going back to lighter colours in the background. But this is the reverse of that, and you can see that you can get it to work just the same. Now, if we look at this one, notice how you've got all the lines leading in from all four corners of your composition, and they lead in to that white road that leads you right down. Now, see those white patches on the side of the road? Look how they're picked up on the other side in the shape of the fields in about the middle distance going through. Now, so you've got line that leads in, you've got shape, all those triangular shapes working quite comfortably, and then you've got contrast as well of shape because you've got the rounded shape and the triangular shapes as well. And then, of course, you've got the full range of your tonal values from white right through to black. And you can see all of them working there. Now, you may not want to sit yourself up on the side of the road because it may be a bit too dangerous. But if you've got, you know, a track on the farm or, you know, down by the beach or somewhere or other, or in a quiet part of the town, you can set yourself up like this, and you can see that you've got all these lines that will lead in and create quite an interesting composition. It's also interesting from the point of view looking at this one that you've got organic lines that follow the line of the foliage, the trees, but you've also got the man-made lines, the ones that follow the edge of the road, and where the bulldozers have been through and they've cut through the cutting there to create some rather harsh lines coming through. So you've got a lovely contrast of line and shape, and your tonal values are working really delightfully in that composition. And you'll notice that I'm not showing it to you in colour, it's purely achromatic, so that you've got the full scope from white through to black. Now, if we look at the next one, we have this dear old one. You've seen this before, but now again you're seeing it from the point of view of line and shape and your tonal values. Now, if you look at the shape, you can see that the orange is repeated in the dial on the old-fashioned wireless that is picked up in the dial of the clock. And then it's suggested to you again in the label on the soft drink bottle. Then if you look at the rectangular shape within the wireless, you'll see that that is repeated in the overall composition. The bottle, it wouldn't look nearly as successful if you only had one. It's been repeated, so you get two sitting there. And so you've got a repetition of shape. Now look at the lines that lead in, using the golden rectangle, the line that comes across the bottom, the one that's coming in on the 1/3 line, and then the lines that follow around the old-fashioned radio, and the one that describes the clock. And look at the difference between the lines on the clock and the lines on the orange. And you've got that difference there. One is mechanical or geometric, and the other one is much more organic and soft. It's more flowing, it's more touchable. Now, then you look at your values, and you can see that you can go from the deepest black right through to white. And the white is where you're getting highlight and light and reflected light. You'll see some reflected light bouncing back up into the dial of the old-fashioned radio there. So that's a composition that you can put together quite easily to practice on. Go down into the old farm sheds and see what you can dig out of the old rubbish down there that people have been hoarding for ages and ages and ages, and you will find plenty of beautiful things to draw. They're really fascinating. Or go down to, you know, the clay pots or around the beach and see what you can find down there as well. And you'll find lots of things like this to draw. You may find it easier, if you're drawing outside, to draw either in the early morning or in the late afternoon when the light is not quite so harsh, and you'll get a much better range regarding your tonal values. Now if we move on to the next one, now here's rather a difficult subject, and it's like the old-fashioned cyclone fence that's all compressed, or you can look at chicken wire or bird wire and how it's compressed. Now this is quite a difficult subject to look at, and you would need a lot of patience, and you'd need to be, you know, quite skilled to do all the drawing that is involved in this. Pardon me, I do throw it in for those of you who want the extra challenge. And here you've got line and shape and of course the full tonal scale going right through there. It's a beautiful example of really taxing your ability to see and to really come in and look for the repetition of shape. Just look at all those shapes that are repeat, 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 and then look at the way the light is bouncing off some of that wire. That is quite a complicated one to do, and I wouldn't recommend it for somebody who is just starting out. But it is something that you can aim for. You know, you should always aim for the stars. You may not reach them, but at least you won't end up with a fistful full of mud. Now, let's move at the next one. And shapes can be geometric or organic. Lines can be soft and or broken. They can be heavy and or thick. They don't have to be both, and or. Values of tones can create atmosphere or mood, and that is frequently reflected in your drawing. You know, sometimes the mood you're in comes across in the drawing that you're doing on. So, you know, if you start ending up with really heavy, dark drawings, maybe because you're in a pretty dark mood yourself. Now, let's move on a little bit to this one. I rather like this kind of approach because what you've got here are just some shoes looking from above, and they've been drawn in such a way that you've got all the tonal values there. You've got line, you've got the repetition of shape, and some of the lines have become really thick and heavy. But then what's been done here is that the eraser's been taken in a diagonal movement. And you don't scrub, you take them in a diagonal movement across from left to right if you're right-handed. And that gives it that blurring approach. And you've got to be selective. Obviously, the dark shadows have been left alone, and it's just hitting the light areas on the shoe that pick up. That's quite a delightful drawing because of the way the eraser has been used to give that striping effect. It's quite a clever little technique that you can practice. You can do it with your finger, you can do it with a cotton wool bud, but it's much easier to do it with your kneadable rubber or a very, very soft rubber. Now moving on, you've got this one. Now this is a very, very delightful drawing, and you know, if you've got somebody who's prepared to pose for you in front of a window, well then you can practice this. And again you can see the repetition of shape. You've got organic, geometric, you've got soft, thick, dark, light. You've got the whole gambit working there, and it's a beautiful composition. You'll see that it's working on the golden rectangle. The 1/3 lines are working really, really delightfully in this work, and there's that lovely play of light that moves across. The head is actually in what we call contre-jour. It is against the light, so you don't have to put in all the details. It's like a silhouette. That's what contre-jour is. It's working in silhouette, and it works really beautifully in this particular work. So, if we look at this one, this is another approach where you can use your kneadable eraser, or you can use your pencil to develop this technique. Just streaks of the pencil over the top of your drawing so that you're adding to the top and you get that streaking effect moving through. Now, if we move from that one, let's see if I can get this to work. Yes, now here's a close-up of these shoes, and we'll see what we can see here. Notice how beautiful that highlight is in there. And so you wouldn't put any tone on that part. You leave that white. You can leave the white of this lace as well. But where it goes into the shadow up in here, well, then it goes into a little bit of tone. Now, even though this is black, it must be getting some light. See it bouncing on there. So again, you need some highlight on there. And you can see some highlight on the strap working through there. So again, you don't have to draw the whole box. You can select a part of the still life so that you can still see the lines working. You can see these ribbons of rag. You don't have to go down the shop and buy expensive ribbons. Just tear up any old tea towel that you've finished with, any piece of rag that you can throw into the composition. The object here is not to look at color. It is to look, of course, at the tonal values that you can see. You can see that lovely tone that's working through there on that side, and that's getting the light coming through. And then you can see down in here the difference in tone between there and there. And so you've got that lovely range that you can use. And you can see that similar things have been done in this one, where you've got, the edge of the bowl and the way the fruit is sitting in that bowl. And so when you're working, you need to look at how your composition is going to look finished. And so if we come back to dear old me sitting here, think about your composition and how you're going to put it together, so that if you're going to do a drawing, you need to think, right, well, now I'm going to do my whole drawing and it's going to sit there quite comfortably, and I'm going to make sure that my drawing is going to fit the edges of my paper. And you then start to think, well, now, am I going to do it in contour drawing? Well, you certainly can do it in contour drawing. Am I going to do it in gesture? Yes, you can. Am I going to measure it up? Well, you can do that too, right? You can measure and do all that kind of thing, and see how it works. Now, I'll start with a gesture movement coming through here, just to get the feeling of it. And that's quite important, because you need to start working and finding out where you're going to put things in your composition. This is not going to be the finished drawing, not by any stretch of the imagination. And then there's there's something sitting up in here. Oh yes, it's part of that shoe. And there's a dark tone underneath there, so I can put that in. And I'm going to put that, comes across here, and it's got that little toggle on the end. And that works back up through there. And of course this shoe then goes off in that direction. Now I'm not going for accuracy in this case. I'm just plotting in to see how it's going to fit within the paper and whether I'm going to be happy with it. So that I can then start working back over here, and I've got this darkness coming over there as well. The unfortunate part about this is the fact that what I'm looking at is not necessarily the same that you're looking at from the point of view of the still life. But now I can see that I've got a composition starting to work there, but it needs something up in here. So let's have a look at the still life and see, well, yes, there is this line that comes up, and it's a raggedy old line that dances across the top. It's the trouble with Willow's charcoal. Right, so I can put that across the top, and that starts to work that, and then I can see that there's an edge to a box here, and it comes down behind that shoe. So I can put that in, and that starts to develop that, and there's more to that rag fitting down there. Now I'm starting to get a composition to work. Now once I've got that working quite comfortably, then you can come in and you can start, right, well, this is very dark in here, so let's get it nice and dark. And we can push that right back. And this is a lovely time. You can really, you know, go to town and make that really sing with blackness. And push that in there. And I'm just using the side. Right. Now look how lovely and dark that is. Now that immediately starts to push this forward. Now here, although I've done that in gesture, I can now start to say, well, now I'm going to do a contour line over that. And you ignore what you've put there before, because you're now looking at it from another point of view. And I'm following that down into that little toddle down there at the end of the lace, and I travel back up that lace, and that comes across. Whoops, the paper's bending. And that comes up through there, and then this one comes up through there as well. Now, that's where this takes off. And I lead up into there. And so I'm starting to draw, and then that means that I can, you know, because I've been using Willow's charcoal, I can rub that out now if I want to. Or I can leave it there. It doesn't really matter. And you can start looking at, you know, the way this shoe fits down underneath there. And then you've got all those lovely tones. And then you've got this old shawl thing that ladies wear, particularly in the summer months. And that comes across and fits in through there. And so you can do contour, or you can go back to the old measurement and start measuring as well, and using, say, a shoe and saying, well, you know, how long is that shoe, and how does it compare with other ones. I seem this afternoon to be working on the idea of using contour line, and some of you may feel a little bit more comfortable working with that. Shoes are rather lovely to draw. I'll tell you why. They sit still. They don't move around. And so, you know, you put them there and they'll stay where you want them to. Now, there's a whole lot of range of things happening in the background here as well that you can work on too. So you've got a whole range of lines and shapes that you can look at. Come back to me. Yes, that's better. That you can, you know, look at and put together. There's, you know, if you don't like shoes, well, a pile of belts, hats. I know your study guide says shoes, but, you know, just write a note to the marker, might be me, and say, look, you know, I really didn't feel like doing shoes. I've done hats instead. Well, as long as you're drawing, that's the important thing, as far as I'm concerned. So let's have a look at what I've got on the computer here. We've seen that one. What else have we got? Oh, yes. Now, again, this is like that wire that I showed you. Not the easiest subject to look at, but notice how it's been divided up. Now, Jim has done a lovely job with this, and you can see that there's if you look at the top on the left-hand side, you can see where the clock and the old-fashioned radio and things are starting to slot in. But here you've got organic and geometric. You've got really thick lines. Just look at the thick lines in those chairs. And you've got heavy line, which is in, say, the bottom part of the door. But you've also got very fine lines. On the right-hand side of the door jab, it's a very light line, soft and broken. And then look into the figure, and that's very broken as well. Now, you've got a lot of what I call timbrism, that dark side to the face and on the left, and following down the nose line, and then on the other side, light. And so you've got that difference coming through there as well. Number of things for you to remember. Of course, when you're looking at the landscape, this is quite a complicated one. I mean, if you're up in 2J or York or Moira, no, perhaps Moira might be a little bit too flat, but, you know, down around Albany and those places, or way up north, you're bound to get some hills. And you get up on the side of a hill and look down, and they're fabulous and you can see the relationship of all the shapes moving right through. So, points to remember: see and measure. Use a wide variety of lines and tonal values. Use line and your tonal values to describe your shapes. You can describe your shapes without using line, just by using tone. And sometimes you can do that with your finger. So, come back over here until I see you in program 8B, where we're going to be using some mixed media, so you may want to get some things ready, you know. It's quite a, you know, I like mixed media. You know, I like playing with things. It's great. You should enjoy it. But anyway, hello and welcome to program 8B, the final part of this entire program. As you can see, a couple of different things today. One, I'm wearing a bit more colour. I got tired of wearing just plain blue and plain green, so I threw something else on, just to add a little bit of vitality to myself, not you, me. Now, of course, and then I bought in this still life, which is made up of grass, some plants that I've purloined from the grounds, and of course this delightful specimen. He is dead, unfortunately, but he was a beautiful bird once, and it's a pheasant. Now, I have borrowed the pheasant from the museum. The educational services at the museum have been very, very kind, and they have loaned me this. And what you can do, if you want to use still life like this, you can approach them. There is a commercial rate that you pay. If you are a teacher or a lecturer, you can get it at educational rates. But if you are a member of the public, you can also borrow from the museum, and you also pay for the use of them. But they have a lovely collection, and the people who work there are delightful to deal with, particularly Peter, who is, she is really charming and very, very helpful in your selection, and they do have quite a wide selection for drawing purposes and for study purposes as well. So I do commend them to you. Now, today, mixed media. Now, mixed media, and I thought this subject lent itself to it because of all the colours within the pheasant, but also the detailing out here in the grass as well. Now, when you're dealing with these things, remember that drawing is essentially, you know, linear. And so you need to be careful that you don't get carried away with mixed media, and particularly throwing in too many colours. I would suggest to you that you use, just one colour, at the most two, and try to limit it to that. If you go into the reds or the red oranges or the yellow orange, remember that they're warm colours and they will approach, while the cool colours like the blues and the greens will recede. You can see that in the head of the pheasant here against the green of the plant behind. So you need to be aware of that. So don't try using, a bright orange, say, in the background, because when you stand back from it, it'll suddenly look closer to you than the things in the foreground, and you need to be aware of that kind of thing. Now, I will be moving around a little bit. I'll let you have a close look at the still life. There you are. And you can see what he looks like close up. And you can see all these beautiful markings in the feathers here, these marks, which lend themselves beautifully to drawing. And you'll notice that they're not regular, right? They are broken, and they become shapes, and even into the comb of the pheasant. What you can't really see from up there is the eye that's in there, and it's the same colour as the crest of the bird. And then, of course, you've got these striations that you have through here are happening through the tail feathers as well. So there's that repetition coming through. And then in the grass that I've used, it tends to pick up this kind of pattern, which adds to the camouflage. Now, you're going to say, well, I don't have access to a pheasant. No, you don't. But you may have a cat, a dog, not a stuffed one, and I wouldn't suggest you go out and kill it just for the sake of drawing it. But you may have chickens, roosters, ducks, geese, whatever, on farms or in neighbouring properties that you can use. Sheep are quite good, cattle, because they will sit still for a length of time while you're observing them. And then, of course, you don't have to use these things. You can use just seascapes, landscapes. You can use toys in here. You can go for other still life as well. So it doesn't have to be as exotic as a dear old pheasant that you've got sitting there that you'll have to draw something like that. And don't be put off by looking at that. Now, if we look at the image here on the computer, you can see a drawing that's been done in a sketchbook. And in the background, on the left-hand side of your screen, that's actually a reproduction taken from a small calendar, and it's a work by Matisse, and it's been glued into the work. And then the drawing has been done in front of that. Now, this is mixed media. It's using a reproduction, which of course you can do on the photocopier and get it down to the size you want and reproduce it in black and white so the colours don't interfere. And then, of course, the pear has been done using pastel, a soft black pastel, and then the striations on the right-hand side have been done using pencil. So you've got mixed media working there. Notice the use of negative space. It creates an interesting balance right across the work. Now, I've left the spiral band there so that you can see that it's done in an ordinary drawing book. So there's nothing special about it. And the edging to the whole drawing is also done with paper. Now, that is achieved by using a simple thing like gift wrap paper. But do be careful in the choice of colour so that the edging doesn't detract too much from the drawing itself. You always know when somebody doesn't like your artwork when they admire the frame rather than the artwork, so be careful of that one. Now, if we look at the next one here, you have the pegs, and this is also mixed media because in the background ink has been used and then charcoal worked over the top. Now, you can see that the image has been duplicated to get a better balance to the work. You can see some gestural line, you can see contour line working very comfortably in that whole composition. But it is mixed media. And now when you're applying the ink to that, you need to let the paper dry before you start working on it with your Conte or with your charcoal or with your compressed charcoal. So, you know, you can try working dry on wet while it's still wet, but you may find that you tear the paper, and that's not quite a good idea. Now, in your study guide, I mentioned that, you know, you could work with dry media, you can work with wet media, and of course you can work with a mixture of that. But don't get too carried away. It is a good idea to limit the media you're working with. Now, here's another one, and this is using Conte and felt pen and working together. You can see the energy in this one. You can see the energy in the background, how the darkness of the felt pen really carries it back and throws the old dead branch forward. And that's using just ordinary Conte and felt pen. So that when you come to looking at these things, this is what you need to remember. It gives you a richer surface. It creates more impact if you use a couple of different media in your work. And it also allows you greater freedom, so that if you make a mistake, rather than do the whole drawing again, you can collage over the top of the mistake. And some people, you know, find difficulty often when they're made a mistake, and then they think, oh goodness, what am I going to do now to cover that up? So let's see some marks that we can make on the paper here. Now, first of all, I have some ink. This is just ordinary drawing ink, black drawing ink, that I've mixed with water. I have some water in a container here. I also have some coffee, some black coffee, that I can use if you don't have any ink. Now, you also don't have to have expensive equipment. You can have just ordinary pencils that you can use. This one is a double E. This one is a Faber-Castell. It's a 4B. And this one gives me a blue. It's like a Chinograph, but it's actually one that's called an EB. It's also a very, very soft pencil. I'll also use a brush, and this is just a watercolor brush with sable hair, or you can get it with an acrylic. That is quite useful. Then, of course, there's just the ordinary old blackboard chalk. There's orange and blue and green. But if you're working, say, on white paper and you've made too many marks that are not pleasing, there's white chalk as well. Now, in addition to that, I've got the old craypa. Now, craypa is not the best thing to draw with because it can leave, sort of streaky marks. So you need to be very light with your touch when you're working with craypa. Other things that I've got here, of course, are whiteboard markers and other felt pens. If you're working with these, it's a good idea to work outside because sometimes the smell from these can give you severe headaches, so be careful of that. And then in addition to that, of course, I've got the Conte, which works very, very well indeed. Now, if you look at the still life, if I can go back to that, there's your still life, or we can go a little bit closer, thanks to Joe, and you can see that you've got all those shapes there that you can look at. And this subject lends itself beautifully to using mixed media. You can put down an ink wash to start with and then draw over the top of it. Or you can start drawing and then work back into it if you wish. It is entirely up to you how you wish to work as you go. Now, if we just come back over to me for a little while, over my shoulder. I'm working on a watercolor paper here, but you don't need to do that. You can work on cartridge, you can work on lithograph or newsprint, and work quite happily doing those sort of things. So you may want to work in gesture and get some marks down and just work very quickly. And I'm looking at the crest of the bird, and then of course it comes over into his beak area. And you may want to do it with Conte, or you may want to do it with pencil, or you may find it easier to work with your Willow's charcoal, so that you can, sort of rub it out. When you're drawing the eye, don't feel that you've got to put the whole thing in. And that line goes back through there, and then it comes down underneath the chin a little bit, and then of course he's got his ruffle coming out there, which is quite dark. And he comes down around here. It's not a big bird, it's quite a small bird, as you would have seen in the opening shots. And then, now, if you're going to measure, you need to take some measurements. You may decide that you'll measure the height of the bird, so from his feet to the top of his back, and use that as your unit of measurement all the way through. Now, there are striations that work through here that you can put in, and just suggest them. Don't put them in too hard. Just work at them very slowly, very quickly to start with, and just get those moving through. And you remember that they go right up to their head, and they work quite nicely up through there. And then of course there is the wing feather coming in through here. Now at this stage, of course, you may decide, well, I want to put some ink into that, so that you can put that into the background. Now be careful that you don't get too many harsh lines with that working, so that when you're putting it together, don't feel that you've got to stay exactly in to the outline of your drawing. If you're making too many marks there and you think, oh, that's in the wrong place, just pick up a tissue and dab it off, and that'll get rid of the excess straight away. And straight away now you've got mixed media, because you've got Conte and ink, and you're using a dry medium with a wet medium, so that you've got this combination already, and that might be as far as you want to take it when you're first trying these sort of things, so that you can keep on drawing from this point without feeling that you've got to introduce other media. However, if you do decide to bring other media in, and it doesn't have to be naturalistic color, you can work with the fact that you've got lots of grasses coming out here, and you can work with those, and they're making little notes, like notes of music. I can't for the life of me remember what you call this grass, but there's plenty of it around at almost any time of the year. I usually pick some of it up and hold on to it until it gets so old, and then I just go out and get a fresh lot. My wife doesn't. My wife always says I'm a bowerbird, because I keep picking up, bits of twigs and leaves and things, because I think they're interesting to draw. And so now I've introduced a third medium into that. I've introduced chalk into that, and you can have lots of fun with the chalks, because it allows you to make very quick, rapid strokes, and pick up on the feeling that there's activity going on, like wind moving through the grass, which might give the bird a little sense of movement happening. Now, if you don't like that, of course, you've got the old charcoal that you can fall back onto, and remember that you can work into the charcoal quite nicely by using your fingers. Remember, if you're using with pastel and with charcoal, you do need to use some spray, and you can use hairspray. It's possibly better on the drawing than in your hair, or you can use, you know, the fixative that you can buy from the art shop and work that way. And remember what I've said in the past regarding family members. Do be careful that they don't criticize you too much. And so sometimes it's a good idea not to show them too much of your work in the initial stages. And so that, you know, you build up your confidence gradually as you go. Now, when you're working back into the bird, of course, you've waited, and that's what I've been doing. I've been waiting for that ink to dry so that I can work back over the top. And I can start building him up and following him through, and I can bring in that line there and work across. Now, this is an opportunity of working with the feathers to take the conte for what I call a walk, and so that builds in some extra lines as well. And don't forget the feathering that comes through. Keep it soft. There's plenty of time where you can go much darker later on. You don't have to feel as if, you know, you've got to work into the dark straight away. And build it up gradually. Work. Now, come up into the top of him. And of course, you've got all these lovely, beautiful little shapes in here of the feathers as they move across his back. And you can build those up as well. Just quietly work, and when you're getting, you know, tired, take a break, go and have a cup of coffee, or have a cup of tea, or go for a walk. Don't feel that you've got to be there. Now, the beauty of working on your own, as many of you would be, is that the thing that has to drive you is your own self-motivation. You have to rely on being motivated yourself. You have to push it along at your own rate. You're the one who has to decide to maintain your interest and to keep the work being activated. You have to find the interest out there. You know, other people around you can do so much, but they can't do everything for you. And so that's something that you need to work on and to consider at all times. Now, this technique here, where I'm using, this would not be part of this particular drawing, I'm just using the paper for my own purposes here. If I'm using a greasy crayon, and that's what this cray part is, I can then work my ink over the top. And where the greasy crayon is, repels. And so that keeps coming through. And that's the beauty of, you know, working with ink and a greasy crayon. Now, if you don't have a greasy crayon, an old white candle will work as well. And so if you want to maintain the white in your drawing, that's something you can do by using a white crayon or a white candle, draw with it, and then put the ink over the top. And it'll come out white because it repels it. Now, if I don't like a particular line, you can see that I can soften that by just using white chalk. And the old white chalk does come in handy at times. It can cover up as well as create interesting effects. And it's really what you're looking for. You're looking for effects that are pleasing to the eye. You look for balance and all those kind of things as well. Now, if I go back to the computer, you can see this image, and this also is mixed media. Piece of paper can be used to create the window pane, And then, of course, you can use ink to draw the old telephone or the modern telephone, and you can use pencil, and you can use charcoal for the rest of the drawing. So it does become a mixed media. That's quite a complicated drawing. It may look simple, but it isn't. It has quite a lot of complexities. You'll notice how shapes are repeated right through the entire work. Now you'll immediately think, hello, well, where is that window catch? Well, that is a rectangle which is repeated in the bottom right-hand corner, and it's also repeated in the shape of the window pane itself. And so that works quite well as mixed media. This one also is a little bit more complicated. Now, this can be done by using collage, and this is an old calendar picture of Rembrandt's The Anatomy class, which has been cut up and separated so that it's collage, but then into that charcoal has been used and ink as well to make that particular composition. So, if we look at this one, points to remember. Draw whenever you can. It can be a very rewarding experience just to sit there and draw. Now, you will not improve unless you practice, and you have to practice. A baby, when it starts to walk, certainly practices what it's newly discovering, and that's what you need to do as well. We all tend to be, you know, at various stages of development. Only draw from your own environment or from your own imagination. And in the initial stages, I would recommend to you that you draw the things around you so that you get used to seeing things. And that means that you keep exploring. Don't look at things from just the one angle all the time. Look at them from different angles, from below, from above, from this side, from the other side. And then, of course, you know, the experience of drawing can be very rewarding. It's almost a love-hate relationship. But you do need to keep practicing, and that you need to, you know, enjoy it as much as you can. You know, as I said at the beginning, you won't have pheasants perhaps to draw, but you'll have lots of other interesting things to draw. It could be, you know, a lawnmower. It can be a bicycle. It can be a boat. It can be a tractor. It can be, you know, a farm shed. It can be the fowl yard. There's a whole range of things out there that you have never really looked at closely before, and they're the kind of things that you need to get out there and do. So, until I see you, perhaps in another program, I want you to, you know, look back over these 8 programs and enjoy the experience of drawing, just making marks on paper, because really that's what it's all about. You know, if you can find things like this in your environment to draw, like down around places like Bunbury and further south, there are bird sanctuaries there that perhaps will let you in to sit there and draw. Or you can go to the Museum of West Australia and sit in their space and draw as well. So, let's see what we can find. I'll just move to that one. And enjoy the experience of drawing at all times. So, until I meet you again, enjoy the world out there. Enjoy what you can see, enjoy what you can do, and may the good Lord go with you as well.